I gently took the $30 million lottery ticket from my daughter's limp fingers, folded it once, and walked out the front door. I didn't slam it. I closed it softly, the familiar click of the latch echoing the sound of a life ending. The last thing I saw was her face, pale as a ghost, her mouth open in a silent scream. You're probably thinking, what kind of father does that? What kind of man walks away from his only child at the moment of their greatest triumph? But this wasn't a triumph. It was a betrayal. To understand the cold, quiet resolve I felt as I left her standing alone in the house I built for us, you have to understand the words she spoke to me just 20 minutes earlier, words that shattered a lifetime of love and sacrifice in a single breath. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts on this story in the comments. It all started on what should have been the happiest day of our lives. Our little weekly ritual, a simple lottery ticket, had finally paid off. But what should have been a celebration of our future became the moment she decided I no longer had a place in it. Before that Tuesday, my life had a rhythm, steady and predictable as the grain in a plank of oak. It was a life measured in sawdust and coffee, in the rising and setting of the sun over the small 2-bedroom house I built with my own 2 hands 30 years ago. Every morning started the same way. The 5 a.m. alarm, the groan of the floorboards as I made my way to the kitchen, the familiar hiss of the old coffee pot. The air always carried a faint, sweet smell of pine and cedar, a perfume that clung to my clothes, my skin, my very soul. It was the smell of my trade, the smell of providing. It was the smell of home. After Clara's mother, Ellen, passed, that house became more than just wood and nails. It became a sanctuary, a fortress built to protect my daughter from the world's harsh edges. The heart of that fortress was the living room, and its throne was a worn-out floral sofa. The pattern, once a vibrant mix of roses and daisies, had faded to a soft, blurry watercolor over the years. That sofa had seen everything. It's where I held a tiny, sleeping Clara in my arms for the first time after we brought her home. It's where she'd sit with her legs tucked under her, brow furrowed in concentration as she worked through her algebra homework, the light from the floor lamp making a halo in her hair. We watched countless old black and white movies there, sharing a bowl of popcorn, her laughter echoing in the small space. The fabric was thin in places, and one of the springs on the left cushion had a permanent squeak. But to me, that sofa was a living testament to our history. It held the imprint of our lives. Our weekly lottery ticket was just another part of that comfortable rhythm. Every Friday, without fail, on my way home from the job site, I'd stop at Miller's convenience store. I'd walk in, the little bell over the door announcing my arrival, and nod at Mr. Miller. "The usual, George?" he'd ask, and I'd nod back. One quick-pick ticket. I'd pay my $2, the crisp bill feeling significant in my calloused palm. The ticket itself was never the point. It was the ritual. I'd bring it home and place it on the kitchen table, right next to the salt shaker. Later that evening, Clara would take a pen and carefully fill in the little circles with our numbers. 12, for her birthday in December. 28, for the day Ellen and I were married. 04, for the month Ellen passed. They were numbers that told our story, a secret code of love and loss. It was our 5-minute dream each week, a shared whisper of, what if? What if we didn't have to worry about the property tax bill that was due on July 15th? What if I could finally replace the roof that had been leaking near the chimney since the big storm of 2019? What if I could afford to get the transmission fixed on my 2008 Ford Ranger, instead of just praying it would hold on for one more year? My dreams were never about yachts or mansions. They were about security, about rest. I remembered the day I sold my old truck, a beautiful 1987 F-150, seafoam green with a bench seat that had molded perfectly to my frame. I sold it for $2,500, so Clara could have a reliable down payment for her first car when she started community college. Seeing the pride on her face as she held the keys to her little 2005 Corolla was worth more than any truck. I told myself that every time my back ached from another 10-hour day of hauling lumber, it was all for her. Lately, though, something had shifted. It was subtle, like the change in the air before a storm. She'd started spending all her time with a new boyfriend, Mark, a guy who worked in finance and wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He talked about investments, about leveraging assets, about escaping what he called the trap of a small life. Clara started using his words. She'd look around our home, the home I'd poured my life's blood into, and her gaze would be distant. "This place is so small, Dad," she'd say, a new, critical edge to her voice. "Don't you ever want more than this?" I thought it was just youthful ambition, a desire for the world that I had always encouraged. I never imagined that more meant a world without me in it. I never imagined that her love had a price tag, and that my life's work was about to be put on clearance. The first time Mark came over for dinner, it felt like a foreign dignitary was visiting our humble home. He arrived not in a normal car, but in a gleaming black BMW that hummed instead of rumbled, taking up nearly the whole driveway. He stepped out wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked so sharp I was afraid he'd cut himself on the lapels. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and as he stepped onto the porch I'd built plank by plank, I saw my own worn-out work boots reflected in them. He shook my hand, his grip firm but brief, his eyes scanning everything. The porch swing I made for Ellen's birthday in 1999, the slight sag in the gutter, the faded paint on the window trim. It wasn't a curious look. It was an appraisal. He was calculating the value of my life's work in seconds. Clara was a different person around him. She fussed over everything, smoothing her dress, arranging the silverware just so. She'd made a roast, something we hadn't done in years, and the familiar, comforting smell filled the house. But the atmosphere was anything but comfortable. During dinner, Mark dominated the conversation, talking about stock portfolios and market trends, words that felt alien in my kitchen. He'd pause occasionally to ask me a question, but it always felt like a test. "So, George," he said, swirling the wine in his glass, a cheap bottle I'd picked up special for the occasion. "Clara tells me you're a carpenter. That's noble work." Very hands-on. The way he said noble made it sound like quaint or obsolete. I just nodded. "It's honest work. Puts food on the table." He smiled, a tight, thin-lipped expression. "Of course. But have you ever considered leveraging your primary asset? This house. The property values in this area have gone up 12% since 2020. You're sitting on a decent nest egg. You could sell, invest the capital, and actually retire. Let your money work for you, instead of the other way around." I looked at Clara, expecting her to jump in, to defend our home, to say something about the memories held in these walls. But she just stared at her plate, a small, eager smile on her face. "Mark's been teaching me so much about finances, Dad. It's a whole different world." The conversation moved to the living room after dinner. Mark sat on the edge of the floral sofa as if he were afraid of catching something from it. He ran a hand over the faded fabric. "This is an interesting piece," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A real vintage find." He then turned to Clara, ignoring me completely. "Babe, when we get our place, we're going for a minimalist aesthetic. Clean lines, Italian leather. Something that says success." Clara didn't miss a beat. "Oh, absolutely. I'm so tired of all this clutter." Clutter. She was talking about the framed photos of her as a child on the mantelpiece, the bookshelf I built that held all her favorite books from high school, the hand-stitched quilt her grandmother made that was draped over the back of the armchair. My entire world, reduced to clutter. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to make coffee, just to have something to do with my hands. I could hear their whispers from the other room, their voices low and conspiratorial. I heard the words "starter home" and "dead equity." That night, after they left, the silence in the house was deafening. The smell of Mark's expensive cologne lingered in the air, a chemical scent that didn't belong. I sat down on the floral sofa. On the very spot he had judged, I ran my hand over the worn armrest, feeling the familiar texture of the fabric, the slight dip in the cushion where I had sat holding my daughter for thousands of nights. It was the first time in my life that I felt like a stranger in my own home. The cracks weren't just in the foundation anymore. They were splitting right through the heart of my family, and I was too stunned to do anything but watch them grow. That Tuesday evening felt just like any other. The television was murmuring in the corner, broadcasting the nightly news and, eventually, the lottery numbers. The ticket, our little slip of shared hope, lay on the kitchen table where it always did. Clara picked it up as the announcer began to read the winning sequence. I was half listening from my armchair, my mind on a stubborn cabinet door I'd been wrestling with at work. 12, she said, her voice casual. A small check mark with her pen. 28. Another check. Her hands stilled. 4, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My head snapped up. Those were our numbers. Our story. She read the rest in a rush, her voice climbing with each matching digit. When she finished, there was a profound silence in the room, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, her hand trembling so hard the ticket vibrated. "Dad?" she breathed. We won!" For a second, the world stood still. Then it exploded. I was on my feet, rushing to her, pulling her into a hug so tight I worried I'd break her. We were laughing, crying, shouting, a mess of pure, unadulterated joy. $30 million. The number was so immense it felt like a joke. I saw it all in a flash. The roof finally fixed, my tools updated, a small savings account that would let my old bones finally rest. I saw us, safe. We collapsed onto the floral sofa, the one that held the history of our lives, and for a few perfect minutes, we were just a father and a daughter whose wildest dream had just come true. The celebration lasted less than 20 minutes. The shift was so sudden it felt like a physical blow. The laughter died in her throat and she pulled away from my embrace. Her eyes, which had been filled with joyous tears, turned distant and calculating. She picked up her phone from the coffee table. I thought she was going to call her aunt to share the incredible news, but the name she dialed was Mark. Her voice changed as soon as he answered. It became clipped, efficient, stripped of all warmth. "Mark? It happened," she said, her back straightening. "Yes, the big one. 30 million. I know. I can't believe it either." She paused, listening, her eyes scanning the room not with affection, but with a cold, assessing gaze. "No, he's right here. Listen. I need to move fast. What was that you said about setting up a trust? And the wealth manager's number? Okay. Right. First step is liquidating unproductive assets. Yes, the house is the main one." My blood ran cold. Unproductive assets. She was talking about our home. "Don't worry," she finished, her voice a low, conspiratorial hum. "I'll handle it. I'll call you back in an hour." She hung up and placed the phone face down on the table with a decisive click. She turned to me, her face a mask of detached resolve. She didn't look like my daughter anymore. She looked like him. "Dad, we need to talk," she said. "Talk?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Clara, we just won the lottery. We should be celebrating." A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "I am celebrating. This is the start of my life, my real life." "Our life, you mean," I corrected gently, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. She let out a short, sharp laugh that cut me to the bone. "No, I mean mine." "Listen carefully. I need you to pack a bag." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. The room felt suddenly cold, the familiar walls closing in. I must have misheard. What did you say?" She sighed, a sound of pure impatience, as if explaining something to a child. "I said, pack a bag. The house is going to be sold. Mark and I have plans. Big plans. We're starting over. Somewhere new. This place." She waved a dismissive hand, encompassing the room. "The photos. 30 years of my life. It's holding me back." She walked over and nudged the floral sofa with the toe of her shoe. "All this junk, it's getting thrown out. I'm not going to be tied down by this small, sad life anymore." Her words didn't just hurt. They hollowed me out. My mind flashed back to a lifetime of sacrifices, working double shifts through the brutal winter of 2015 to afford her college textbooks, selling my old seafoam green truck, the last gift from my own father, to pay for her first car, holding her hand through every fever and heartbreak in this very room. I had built my entire world for her, and with a few words, she had condemned me. She saw the devastation on my face and seemed to feed on it. She walked back to the kitchen table, picked up the lottery ticket, and held it up between her thumb and forefinger, a final triumphant taunt. "Look at it," she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. $30 million, the start of my real life, the one I deserve. And that's when it happened. As I watched her standing there, a stranger in my daughter's skin, something inside me shifted. The shock, the grief. It didn't vanish. It crystallized. It turned from a hot, messy agony into a cold, quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. The trembling in my hands stopped. My breathing became slow and steady. The world came back into sharp focus. I looked at her, at the arrogant smirk on her face, at the precious ticket in her hand, and I saw everything with a sudden, chilling clarity. She had made a terrible, terrible mistake. I didn't yell. I didn't beg or plead. The part of me that wanted to do that, the father who would have fallen to his knees and asked what he did wrong, had died in the last 30 seconds. It was a clean, silent death. What was left was something else entirely. Something quieter, colder. I stood there, rooted to the worn linoleum floor of my own kitchen, and simply watched her. I watched as the daughter I had raised transformed completely into a predator, her eyes gleaming with a victory she believed was absolute. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, and the sound of the television news faded into a distant, meaningless hum. My entire world had been reduced to this small, suffocating space, and the two people in it. Her, the victor, and me, the obstacle. My hands, which had been trembling just moments before, became perfectly still. The frantic pounding in my chest slowed to a steady, rhythmic beat, like a hammer driving nails into solid oak. One by one. Precise. Deliberate. I am a carpenter. I don't build things in a fit of passion. I build them with a plan. I measure twice and cut once. I understand foundations, load-bearing walls, and the slow, patient work of creating something that will stand against the storm. As she stood there, gloating over the ticket that represented my life savings in a single miraculous windfall, I began to see the blueprint. A new blueprint. The shock and grief that had clouded my mind evaporated, leaving behind a crystalline, chilling clarity. Every sacrifice, every long hour, every dollar I'd ever poured into her life, it wasn't a gift of love to her anymore. It was an investment. And she had just announced her intention to default on the loan. I looked from her smug face to the floral sofa, our sofa, which she had just condemned as junk. I saw the faint imprint on the left cushion where I had sat for 30 years, and the smaller one beside it where she had grown from a girl into this stranger. The memories didn't bring pain now. They brought focus. She and Mark, with his expensive shoes and talk of leveraging assets, had made their move. They had laid out their entire strategy, confident in their superiority, certain of my weakness. They saw an old man, tired and beaten down by life, an easy target to be discarded. They weren't going to see this coming. Not in a million years. A slow, cold resolve settled deep in my bones. I would not be thrown out like a piece of old furniture. I would not be erased. The game wasn't over. They had just shown their hand, and now it was my turn to play, and I always play to win. I didn't drive aimlessly. My 2008 Ford Ranger, with its rattling transmission and a driver's seat worn into the shape of my body, felt like the only familiar thing left in the world. I drove for exactly 12 minutes until I saw the fluorescent purple and yellow sign of a 24-hour copy shop. The parking lot was nearly empty, lit by the lonely hum of a single street lamp. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and warm plastic. I walked to the counter, placed the lottery ticket, our $30 million bomb, on the cool glass of the copier, and shielded it with my hand as if it were a state secret. I made 3 perfect high-resolution color copies of the front and back. The machine whirred, its bright light scanning over my signature. My name. The total came to $4.50. I paid with a $5 bill and told the young man behind the counter to keep the change. He looked at the slip of paper, then back at me, completely unaware he was handling a life-altering document. I put the original back in my breast pocket, folded the copies carefully, and placed them in my wallet. Measure twice, cut once. My next stop was a small, clean motel off the highway called the North Star Inn. It was the kind of place with a plastic ice bucket and a remote control bolted to the nightstand. The room cost $82.50 for the night. It was sterile, anonymous, and smelled faintly of bleach and pine-scented air freshener, a cruel imitation of the real scent of my workshop. There was no floral sofa, no pictures on the wall, no history. It was perfect. I sat on the edge of the stiff, polyester bedspread, and laid out my plan on the motel's complimentary notepad. The first call wasn't to a friend or family member. It was to the State Lottery Commission. I read the instructions on the back of the ticket. I had 180 days from the drawing date, which was yesterday, July 23, 2024, to claim the prize. The next morning, I was at their regional office in the state capital at 8 a.m. sharp, a full 30 minutes before they opened. The process was surprisingly mundane for something so life-changing. I was led into a small, quiet office where a woman named Brenda, who had kind eyes and a no-nonsense haircut, verified the ticket. She ran it under a scanner, checked the serial numbers against their system, and then looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Well, Mr. Peterson," she said with a small smile, "it appears you are our grand prize winner." She explained my options: the lump sum of $17.2 million after initial taxes, or the 30-year annuity. I remembered Mark's arrogant talk about investing capital. I chose the annuity. It was safer, slower, more deliberate, like building a house one solid plank at a time. The first payment of $650,000 after federal taxes would be wired within 10 business days, on or before August 6th, once the final verification was complete. I filled out Form 5754, provided my driver's license and social security card, and listed my new mailing address, a P.O. box I had rented that morning for $114 for a 6-month term. Leaving that building, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight wasn't just financial, it was the weight of powerlessness, and it was gone. My second call was to a law firm I found after an hour of research at the public library, Thompson & Sterling. They specialized in estate planning and financial law. Their website said they were discreet and strategic. I made an appointment for the following afternoon on July 25th at 2 p.m. My third action was to open a new checking and savings account at a completely different bank from the one Clara and I had used. I deposited the $2,847 I had in cash, my entire life savings until 2 days ago. It felt both pitiful and monumental at the same time. That evening, back in the silence of my motel room, my phone buzzed. It was Clara. I let it ring 4 times before I answered, my heart hammering a slow, steady beat against my ribs. "Dad, where are you?" Her voice was tight, a frayed rope of anger and panic. "I'm safe, Clara," I said, keeping my own voice level, calm. "Safe? You stole my ticket and ran away! Mark says you could go to jail for this. That money is mine." I looked around the empty room, at the blank walls and the generic landscape painting above the bed. "The ticket belongs to the person who bought it and signed it, Clara." I believe that was me. The Lottery Commission seemed to agree. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Silence. I could picture her perfectly, standing in the living room I built, her mind racing, realizing her plan was crumbling. "Dad, stop being dramatic," she finally said, her tone shifting to one of forced reason. "Come home. We can work this out. We can split it. I'll be fair. I'll even give you 10%. 10%. A finder's fee for my own life." I thought of the floral sofa, of the countless nights I'd sat there, worrying about the property tax bill of $4, $328.17 that was due on August 15th, wondering how I'd stretch my last paycheck to cover it and the groceries. 10%. "There's nothing to work out, Clara," I said, the words feeling solid and true in my mouth. "From now on, any communication between us will go through my lawyer. He'll be in touch regarding the house." "Your lawyer?" she shrieked, the last shred of composure gone. "The house? This is my house." "The deed is in my name. The mortgage, which I paid off in full on May 3rd, 2022, was in my name. You are a guest there, and your visit is over." I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a silence of my own making. I looked down at the notepad on the nightstand. On it, I had written a short list. Item number 1 was already checked off, secure the asset. Item number 2 was, find a lawyer. Now I picked up the pen and wrote item number 3, reclaim my home. I circled it. Twice. My meeting with Arthur Sterling was on July 25th, exactly 2 days after my world had been shattered and rebuilt. The offices of Thompson & Sterling were the opposite of my motel room. They were on the 14th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of polished mahogany, soft leather, and the quiet, confident hum of money at work. The air smelled of old books and fresh coffee. Mr. Sterling was a man in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered strategy. I liked him immediately. I laid out the facts, my voice even and steady. I showed him the original lottery ticket, my signature clear at the bottom. I showed him one of the high-resolution copies. I handed him the deed to my house, issued by the county clerk on November 12, 1994, and the mortgage satisfaction letter from the bank dated May 3, 2022. He examined each document under a desk lamp, his silence more reassuring than any empty words of comfort. "The lottery winnings are yours, George." "Unequivocally," he said, his voice a calm baritone. "The ticket is a bearer instrument signed by you. The law is crystal clear on this. As for the house, the title is solely in your name, free of any liens. Your daughter is, in legal terms, a tenant at will. She has no ownership claim." He leaned back in his large leather chair. "So the question is not what we can do. The question is what you want to do." "I want my home back," I said, the words simple but heavy, "and I want her out." "Very well," he nodded, already making notes on a yellow legal pad. "We will proceed with a formal eviction. It's clean, it's legal, and it's impersonal. We will file a 30-day notice to quit with the county court. This gives her a legal deadline to vacate the premises. We'll have it served by a professional process server tomorrow morning, July 26th. She will have until 5 p.m. on August 26th to remove herself and her personal belongings." He quoted me his retainer fee, a sum of $5,000, which I paid on the spot from the cash I had. He handed me a receipt and a client agreement with the case file number S248814. For the first time, my problem had a name, a number, and a legal pathway to a solution. On the morning of August 6th, I walked to the small branch of the new bank I had chosen. I slid my new debit card into the ATM, my hand steady, and requested a balance inquiry. The screen flickered, and then the numbers appeared. Savings account balance, $650,000. I stared at it for a full minute. It wasn't an abstract, $30 million fantasy. It was real. It was security. It was the foundation on which I would rebuild my life. I didn't feel a rush of excitement. I felt a profound sense of peace, the kind a carpenter feels when a structure is finally square and level. I withdrew $300 in crisp $20 bills, just to feel the weight of it in my pocket. 2 days later, on August 8th, Mr. Sterling called me. "George, I've received a call from a Mr. Andrew Vance, an attorney representing your daughter, and a Mr. Mark Thompson." His voice was devoid of emotion. "They are displeased." "I imagine they are," I said, sitting on the edge of my motel bed. Mr. Vance made several arguments. He claimed there was a long-standing verbal agreement to share all assets. He claimed your daughter contributed to the household with non-monetary support. He even floated the idea of contesting the lottery claim based on undue influence and emotional distress. Mr. Sterling paused. I informed him that verbal agreements regarding real estate are not enforceable in this state, that non-monetary support does not constitute ownership, and that the lottery claim was ironclad. I sent him copies of the deed, the signed ticket, and the official winner verification from the State Commission. I believe I used the phrase, legally baseless and borderline frivolous. And their response? A great deal of blustering, followed by a request for a settlement. They are offering to drop all claims if you provide your daughter with a one-time payment of $5 million. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. "Mr. Sterling, please inform Mr. Vance that my counteroffer is this. I will pay for a moving truck and 3 months of a storage unit for my daughter to retrieve her personal belongings from my property. That is my first, last, and only offer. Any further communication from them should be in writing." There was a brief silence on the line, and then I heard Mr. Sterling let out a low chuckle. "George, I do believe we are going to get along just fine. I will convey your generous offer immediately." The next week was a blur of methodical action. I wasn't just waiting, I was building. I contacted a company called Secure Space Storage and rented a 10 by 20 climate-controlled unit for a year, paying the full amount of $2,460 up front. I hired a local moving company, 2 men in a truck, and gave them very specific instructions, scheduled for August 27th, the day after the deadline. I created a detailed inventory from memory. Every piece of clothing in Clara's closet, Every book on her shelf, every piece of jewelry in her drawer was to be carefully packed in labeled boxes. Her bed, her desk, her computer, all of it. I was being meticulously fair, removing any possible claim that I had deprived her of her property. But I gave one special instruction: the floral sofa in the living room was not to be touched by them. I would move that myself. That sofa was not just furniture. It was an archive of our lives. It was the last piece of Ellen I had left. It was the stage for our entire history. Clara had called it junk, but she was wrong. It was the only thing in that house that was truly priceless, and I would be the only one to handle it. The rest of the house would be cleared out and donated. I didn't want any of it. I wanted a clean slate, a new beginning, built on an old foundation. As the days ticked down toward August 26th, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a quiet, powerful sense of purpose. They thought they were playing a game of emotional blackmail. They were about to find out I was playing a completely different game, one with rules, deadlines, and consequences. And the final move was mine. The days at the North Star Inn fell into a new kind of rhythm. I'd wake at sunrise, not to the smell of coffee and sawdust, but to the hum of the ice machine down the hall. I spent my time at the public library, reading books on financial planning and small business management. I was sketching out plans for a new state-of-the-art workshop on a plot of land I was eyeing a few towns over. I was building again, not with wood and nails, but with numbers and legal pads. I was laying a new foundation. The deadline, August 26th, was a firm, solid date on my calendar, circled in red ink. It was not a threat. It was a fact, as solid as the ground beneath my feet. The confrontation came on the evening of August 17th, 9 days before the deadline. There was a hard, insistent knock on my motel room door. It wasn't the gentle tap of housekeeping. It was the sound of impatience, of anger that had been simmering for weeks. I opened the door to find them both standing there, illuminated by the sickly yellow glow of the motel's outdoor lights. Mark was in front, his expensive suit looking comically out of place against the peeling paint of the doorframe. His face was a tight mask of controlled fury. Behind him, Clara looked pale and thin, her eyes red-rimmed but burning with a desperate intensity. "We need to talk," Mark said, his voice low and clipped. He didn't wait for an invitation. Pushing past me into the small room, Clara followed, her eyes darting around the sterile space, a look of disgust on her face. "This is where you're living?" she sneered. "In a dump like this?" I closed the door softly and turned to face them. The room suddenly felt very small. "It's temporary," I said, my voice calm. "What do you want?" Mark took a step forward, trying to use his height and expensive tailoring to intimidate me. "This has gone far enough, George. You've had your little tantrum. Now it's time to be an adult. We've had our lawyer, Mr. Vance, review the situation again. He believes you're acting out of malice, which gives us grounds to sue for emotional damages. We're prepared to drag this through the courts for years. It will cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars." I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. "My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, seems to have a different opinion. He calls your position frivolous." Mark's jaw tightened. His attempt at a power play had failed. He glanced at Clara, a silent command. It was her turn. Her face crumpled instantly, the anger replaced by a performance of heartbreaking sorrow. Tears welled in her eyes and began to stream down her cheeks. "Daddy, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. I made a mistake. I was scared. I was overwhelmed. Mark was just trying to help us, to protect our future. This house, it's our home. It's Mom's home." She took a shaky breath, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What would she think, seeing you throw her own daughter out onto the street? She would be so ashamed." The mention of Ellen was a deliberate, calculated blow, designed to find the softest part of me and twist the knife, but the man she was trying to wound no longer existed. He had died on the living room floor 3 weeks ago. "Your mother," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "would be ashamed to hear her daughter call a lifetime of memories junk. She would be ashamed to see you try to discard your own father the moment you thought he was no longer useful to you." The tears stopped as if a faucet had been turned off. The mask of the grieving daughter fell away, revealing the cold, hard face of greed beneath it. "Useful?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You were never useful. You were an anchor. I spent my whole life trapped in that tiny, sad house, smelling of your sweat and sawdust, watching you count pennies at the kitchen table. That $30 million was my ticket out, my escape. You didn't win that money, I did. I chose the numbers. It's mine. The Lottery Commission, the bank, and the state of this country's legal system seem to disagree, I stated, simply. That was it. The final thread of their control snapped. Mark lunged forward, his face inches from mine, his voice a low growl. You listen to me, you old fool. You are going to sign over half of that money, and you are going to sign the house over to Clara. Or, I will make it my life's mission to ruin you. I will tie you up in court until you're broken begging on the street. Do you understand me? I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked past his contorted face and met my daughter's eyes. There was no love there. No regret. Only a bottomless, chilling emptiness. I had my answer. I had all the confirmation I would ever need. I took a step back, walked to the door, and opened it wide. The humid night air rushed in. My offer for the moving truck and the storage unit is on the table until noon tomorrow. After that, you're on your own. You have 9 days left. I suggest you use them wisely. Clara stared at me, her mouth agape, her chest heaving with rage. You'll regret this, she whispered, the words a final, empty threat. No, Clara, I said, my voice filled with a profound and weary sadness. You already have. I held the door open, my stance unwavering, a silent, unmovable wall. Defeated, they had no choice but to leave, brushing past me into the night. I watched them go. 2 silhouettes swallowed by the darkness. Then, I closed the door, the click of the lock echoing the final, absolute end of a chapter in my life. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. The afternoon of August 26th was heavy and still, the air thick with the promise of a thunderstorm that refused to break. At exactly 5:01 p.m., I pulled my old Ford Ranger up to the curb in front of my house. I wasn't alone. Mr. Sterling sat in the passenger seat, his leather briefcase resting on his lap. In the car behind us, 2 county sheriff's deputies sat waiting, their presence a quiet, official finality. I had done everything by the book. The deadline had passed. This was not a family argument anymore. It was the enforcement of a court order. I took a deep breath, the familiar scent of my neighborhood, cut grass and warm asphalt, filling my lungs. It was time to go home. We walked up the path I had laid with my own hands 20 years ago. The door was closed. I used my key, the metal sliding into the lock with a familiar, satisfying click. The door swung open into silence. For a moment, I thought they had gone. But then I saw them. They were sitting on the floral sofa, side by side, as if they were holding court. Mark was wearing another one of his sharp suits, his legs crossed, a look of smug defiance on his face. Clara was dressed in black, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. They hadn't packed a single box. Not one. They truly believed I wouldn't go through with it. They thought their threats and my love for her would be enough to make me break. Well, well, Mark began, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. Look what the cat dragged in. Come to your senses, George. Ready to discuss our very reasonable settlement offer? I didn't look at him. My eyes were on my daughter. It's 5 o'clock, Clara. The time is up. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Time is up? Are you serious? You're actually going to throw your own daughter out of her home? The only home she's ever known? This is my home, I said, my voice low but carrying through the still air of the room. And you were asked to leave 30 days ago. Mr. Sterling stepped forward slightly, placing his briefcase on the small end table by the door. Miss Peterson, Mr. Thompson, he said, his tone formal and detached. A legal notice to quit was served, and the deadline has expired. You are now trespassing on this property. The deputies are here to escort you off the premises. The word trespassing seemed to hang in the air. The color drained from Clara's face. Mark's smirk faltered for the first time. He looked past me, through the open door, and saw the marked sheriff's car at the curb. He saw the two uniformed officers begin to walk up the path. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a removal. The power in the room shifted so palpably it was like a change in atmospheric pressure. They had lost control completely, and the realization hit them like a physical blow. Mark shot to his feet, his face contorting with rage. "You can't do this! We'll sue! We'll sue you for everything! Harassment! Wrongful eviction!" "You are welcome to try," Mr. Sterling said calmly, not batting an eye. "Now, you can either collect a few personal effects and leave peacefully, or the deputies can remove you by force. The choice is yours." The deputies were at the door now, their presence filling the frame. They were large, impassive men, their expressions neutral. They weren't here to take sides. They were here to enforce the law. Clara finally broke. She scrambled off the sofa, her face a mess of tears and fury, and rushed toward me. "Daddy, no!" she cried, grabbing my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Please, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Don't do this to me. I have nowhere to go. What would Mom say?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, the same hand I had held when she learned to walk. But I felt nothing. The well of my paternal instinct had run dry, poisoned by her own actions. I gently but firmly removed her hand. "Your mother would say that you reap what you sow," I said, my voice devoid of malice, filled only with a deep, final sadness. "You made your choice, Clara. Now you have to live with it." Her face crumbled. The last-ditch attempt at manipulation had failed. The fight went out of her, replaced by a hollow, vacant look of utter defeat. She stumbled back, bumping into Mark, who stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his mind clearly racing for an angle, a threat, a loophole, and finding none. One of the deputies stepped inside. "Sir, ma'am, it's time to go." The deputy's voice was polite but unbreakable. It was over. Mark grabbed Clara's arm, his face a thunderous mask of impotent fury, and pulled her toward the door. As she passed, her eyes fell on the floral sofa one last time. In that fleeting glance, I saw a flicker of what she had thrown away. Not the money, but the history, the love, the life that sofa represented. Then she was gone, escorted out into the fading light, followed by a seething Mark. I watched them get into his gleaming black BMW and speed away down the street without a backward glance. The deputies tipped their hats to me, Mr. Sterling wished me a good evening, and then they were gone too. I closed the door, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden, profound silence. I was alone. In my house. I walked slowly to the floral sofa, ran my hand over the worn fabric, and for the first time in a month, I sat down. The familiar squeak of the left spring sounded like a welcome home. The days that followed were a quiet storm of activity. The next morning, as promised, the movers from 2 men in a truck arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. I stood in the doorway with my clipboard and a cup of black coffee, directing them with a calm efficiency I hadn't felt in years. I watched as they carefully packed away the remnants of my daughter's life in my home. Her clothes, her books, the expensive laptop Mark had bought her. It was all methodically boxed, labeled, and transported to Secure Space Storage Unit number 214. I paid the invoice of $1, $280 for their day's work without a second thought. I wasn't erasing her out of spite. I was cleansing my home of a ghost, a presence that no longer belonged. I had everything else. The old furniture, the chipped dishes, the worn-out rugs, donated to a local charity that helped families get back on their feet. By the end of the day, the house was empty, echoing and vast, except for one thing. In the center of the living room, surrounded by a vast expanse of bare hardwood floor, sat the floral sofa. I had moved it myself, refusing to let anyone else touch it. I slid furniture pads under its old wooden feet and pushed it carefully, feeling every ounce of its weight, its history. It was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was the sole survivor of a life that was, the anchor of a life that would be. That evening, I didn't go back to the motel. I ordered a pizza and ate it sitting right there, on that sofa, in the middle of my empty house. The silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a new beginning, of a space cleared for something better. The moonlight streamed through the clean, curtainless windows, casting long shadows on the floor. The house could breathe again, and so could I. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. I hired a crew to put on a new roof, a deep charcoal gray that made the whole house look stronger, more grounded. The final bill was $14.750, paid in full. I had a new transmission put in my Ford Ranger for $4.200, and it drove like it was brand new. I didn't buy a fancy car. I invested in the reliability I had always counted on. The first annuity check of $54.166 arrived on September 1st, a direct deposit that landed in my new bank account with a quiet, digital hum. I started drawing up the blueprints for my new workshop, a 2,000-square-foot space with heated floors and the best German-made tools money could buy. I was a carpenter again, not by necessity but by choice. The scent of sawdust returned to my life, but this time, it was the smell of passion, not just provision. I never heard from Clara or Mark directly again. Mr. Sterling informed me their lawyer had sent one final, blustering letter which he responded to with a single-sentence reply. "We consider this matter closed." And it was. I realized that what Clara had wanted wasn't the money, not really. It was the power to erase her past, to erase me. But she failed to understand that you can't erase a foundation. You can only build on it. Or you can walk away from it and find yourself with nothing to stand on. My home, once a sanctuary for her, was now a sanctuary for me. The floral sofa still sits in the living room, but now it's flanked by new bookshelves I built myself, filled with books on architecture and history. It's no longer a monument to a shared past. It's my throne. A testament to the fact that a good man, pushed too far, will not break. He will build. It's funny how things turn out. For my entire life, I thought I was building a home for my daughter. In the end, I had to tear it all down just to build a life for myself. That $30 million ticket didn't really change me. It just gave me the tools to reinforce the foundation of self-respect that was always there. It paid for a new roof and a quiet future, but it couldn't buy back what Clara so carelessly threw away. She and Mark saw love as an asset to be leveraged, a resource to be cashed in. They failed to understand that loyalty, respect, and dignity don't have a price tag. Once they're gone, no amount of money can get them back. My actions weren't about revenge. They were about survival. It was about reclaiming my own worth from the rubble of her betrayal. I learned that the strongest walls you can ever build are the boundaries you set to protect your own peace. Today, my home is quiet, filled with the scent of fresh-cut cedar and brewing coffee. A house built on a weak foundation of greed will always collapse. A life, I've now learned, is no different. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.